and welcome back to part 5 of our tutorial on building a game in Blender and Unity. Today we're going to start out by UVing our walls and floor, and what we're going to do here is, first of all, just go ahead and if you put your cursor right up at the top of the screen here, you'll see this little division, and right click on that and split the area. Click to split the area. We're going to turn this one into our image and UV editor, and this gives us our UV set. And we'll go ahead and move this over. Also, I've already, if you can check up in here, all the collisions, I have turned off the visibility, the renderability, and the selectability, so we can't grab them at all. And we're going to go ahead with our floor. We'll start with our floor and go ahead and tab into this. And if you hit the number pad / the division key, you can isolate the object that you're working on. And A to deselect all. So we'll take a look at, we just have our simple floor here. And what we want to do is set up some seams so that we're actually working on only the part that needs to be worked on. The sides and bottom of the floor will be hidden, so they'll be either in the ground or covered up by something else, the front, whatever in front of our building. So we're going to go ahead and go into face mode and grab our center face here. And actually what we need to do is go into edge mode and create some seams. So we're going to go around the top here like this and grab each one of these edges and grab multiples by holding the shift key down, and go over into our tools over here and mark the seam, and you'll see it turn up now as orange. And as a good practice, I'm also going to, although I'm not sure it would matter much because of the way we're going to be using this, but if you mark the edges on a cube like this, it will come out a little bit better when you do the UVing. So we'll mark each one of those and mark the seam. And then go out, and we should see the little orange, easier to see in the wireframe mode, and we should have orange. And we go ahead and select it all, hit U, and unwrap, and we get this. And if you hit shift and spacebar, that will move the that window to a full screen mode. And so what we have here is two sets, and by hitting L, that will grab all of the parts that are linked together, and G, as in the other part, will move them. So this here is the bottom, because this is what we left all linked together with the edges. So we're just going to scale that way down because we really don't care what that does, and slap that in there. And then again hit L to select the larger one, and G to move it in. Then if you use Control A, what that does is set all of your parts that you have selected to their relative size, keeping things so that they're uniform, so that when you put your texture on, one wall or one other thing isn't much larger than the others. And then Control P will take it out to the edges of your UV layout there. Then we'll move back in here, and that pretty much sets up the UVs. So what we'll want to do now is just export your UVs and get to the right folder, desktop, tutorials, and the Blender files, and tutorial 5. Where did I put my textures? There they are, right there, textures. And we're going to save this. And notice it's going to take whatever the beginning, the file name of the entire file, and that's not really what we want. We want the floor, and I'm going to mark it UVs so we know what it is. And we're going to make these rather large because Unity actually allows us to shrink them down as we bring them in. So this gives us a little bit more ability to play around and make sure it looks good. And we definitely want all the UVs. It's all the UVs of the selected item that you have. And we're going to turn our fill opacity down to 0, so it's basically a transparent image with just the UV lines on it. And then we'll go ahead and export that. Give that a second to do its job. And now we can tab back in, and we'll bring it back, and we're going to do the same thing with the walls. Now, with our walls, again, the bottom of the edges will not be seen, and we're going to create an inside wall. And I explained that before. The reason for that, although in this building we're only going to have one wall, if you start putting other walls inside the building, it allows you to not have to add so much geometry, and also dealing with the camera what it can render when you're going into the building. It only has to render what it sees, which leaves the whole outside of the building not have to be rendered, just the room that you're looking at. So on this one, again, we're going to tab in and deselect all, and with our edges, what we want to do here is set seams so that we separate the inside and outside edges of the building. So we're going to take that seam and the outside seam there, and see if Control E will bring up your edge loop, and that should run it all the way along there. And then we're going to want this seam, and this seam, and we're going to mark those seams. Alright, and the rest of it, again, we'll just make it easy by marking these corners, and we'll see how this all lays out when it's done. We'll mark that corner, whoops, mark that corner. I'm going to go ahead and mark the seams and go into full screen mode here. And this can get a little tedious, but this is part of UVing. It is what it is. There's only so much you can do to help it along, and you just have to figure out where the seams are going to make the most sense. And the reason I set them this way is because the outside is where we want the actual texture to go. The inside's not going to matter much. We're just going to shrink that down. But the other thing is by marking these edges, when it flattens out, as you saw with the floor, then it keeps those edges coming straight out from the here, let's take a look here. Go ahead and select all, UV unwrap, and we get this. And that's not really what we're looking for. So the first thing we're going to do is try a different method, our angle-based method. And that means, if you can see in here, we have a seam that didn't get separated. So it's all together at one time. So let's go ahead and tab into there and see. There's the seam. This is the one we missed right here. So we want to mark that seam. And we'll try it again. Select all, unwrap, and see what we got this time. Still not very nice. And let's try the conformal method. Nope, we're still missing something. Let's see. What else are we missing? That one, so it should be. Well, then what we're going to do is go ahead and go into our face select mode, and we're going to select the faces that we actually want to care about, which are these. And now I know, in order to really lay this out right, what we should be doing is marking these edges. The inside doesn't matter. We don't care if that goes all together. But these edges each need to be separated because they're each going to basically have their wall texture on them. So we'll go ahead and mark those seams there. And then go back into face mode. And we're going to just project out the front, the outside walls first. And you do that just by selecting the faces. And again, hit U, unwrap, and we get this nice clean outline. And we're going to Control A, Control P, and I'm not sure why this one's doing it a little differently, but we'll go ahead and fix that. So now that we have those, then what we're going to do here real quick is, before we do all of the inside, we're going to make sure we're in the vertex mode. Hit B and select all of these, and hit W, which gives up your weld and align tools, and align X and get it right all straight there. Then we're going to take these three, because these walls are all the same, and G and line them up like that. And again, B, select all, grab those, W, align X, and make it nice and straight. And just to be on the safe side, we'll go ahead and grab these. Oops, deselect and grab these and align those, which probably already are, but we're going to go ahead and align them anyways. B, got that, and W, and align X, and that should do it. We should be alright with these. They're not quite on top of each other. Maybe they are. So what we might want to do here is go ahead and select the linked, which that seems like it's got two of the wall panels together, and those two of the wall panels together, which is a little interesting, but still should work. Except that we're going to have to notice that this is the top here of this door, and the thin one is the top, so we're going to have to be aware of that when we select them. I'm not sure why it's putting those all together. Let's go ahead and try selecting this and moving it, and I think looks like it's keeping one of the vertices together, and that's probably right along the edge, and I don't think we can split that. Doesn't look like it. Alright, so we're just going to leave this the way it was. It still will work just fine. We just have to remember when we're filling things out that this is the way it's set up. And that is our front. So now we'll go ahead, and those are the outside walls. So now we'll go ahead and invert the selection. You can find that it's Control I or under the select and inverse. And we're going to go ahead and unwrap that and select all so we can see everything, and select the link, and we'll just hit S and scale this down to something insignificant. Now you notice I am leaving the textures done this way because by the way we did this and by making sure everything was set in the very beginning when we exported it, and we were noticing over here, if we go back in, that this is all set to the scale of 1 to 1. That what this does then is make sure that this, the height and the width are actually proportional the way they should be. And therefore, and if I stretch these out to the edge of the UVs, which you might hear someplace that you want to use all the UV space, that's true, except that you're going to now have the width not to the same as the height. And there's probably no better way to actually fit everything into the UV space other than doing this. So I'm going to shrink this down and just stick this over here. And it really doesn't matter because we are never going to see the inside here, so that's not really all that important. Go ahead and select all of them and export the UV layout and get back to our textures folder. And in here, this is going to be our walls. So we'll just name this walls underscore UV. And again, we're going to make sure that this is at 2048. Select it, 2048 by 2048, and the fill opacity to 0. And export our UVs. So now we have our UVs exported. So I'm going to go ahead and save this as we'll just call it UV. Know that the UVs have already been created in there. And save that in our file. And then we're going to switch on over to GIMP. Now on the Mac, you have to use another program called X11 to get GIMP to run. And this works just fine on the Mac. It is a little bit slower, I'm assuming, because it has to run through a second program to work than, say, Photoshop. If you have a PC, it probably runs just fine. And most of the reason I use the Mac is I'm just comfortable with it, and secondly, because the screencasting is quite easy to do on the Mac. So we're going to go ahead and open, and since we saved out those files at 2048 by 2048, we'll go ahead and put those in, and we get our 2048 texture here. And what we're going to do is open as a layer, which is here under File. And I'm not going to go through, I'm kind of learning GIMP as we go along here, so I'm probably not the one to be giving general ideas. There's a couple of really good books out there. I found one called The Artist's Guide to GIMP that was quite well done, and although it doesn't do 3D this kind of work specifically, it gives you a very well-rounded use of how to use GIMP, and you'll be hard-pressed to find how to use even Photoshop for this kind of work. There are a couple of good books out there on it, but for the most part, everything is done about photos and about creating the finished item in Photoshop. And there's some things that's great, and then there's some things that are really not going to work too well for that. And because in Photoshop, when you're creating, or in GIMP, when you're creating something that comes out and is the finished image, all your lighting and stuff needs to be in there. We want a very flat image with the detail there, but with the lighting not there, meaning that you shouldn't be able to tell where the light is coming from other than directly behind the camera, because the game engine is going to provide all of the lights. So let's go find where we put our files, and we'll go ahead and grab the floor UVs and open up that. Now we're opening it up as a layer, so we're going to turn this off, which is the eyes are and the edges are actually right at the edge of the layer, but you can see the center where we shrank the floor down. Now, depending on how you like to work, there's this yellow dotted line around the edge of your selection or layer over on the edge. So if you go down and have layer boundary off, that will turn that off. And that's just the way I prefer to work. We're also going to set this over here as multiply, which should allow it to be seen over the top, which in the floor case doesn't really matter because we're going right to the edges anyways. So the next thing we're going to do is again open in the layer, and I have decided to use this picture, which I created on my PC. Real quick, I'll jump over here in a program that if you have a PC, this is great. It's the Wood Workshop from Spiral Graphics, and it's free and it has a bunch of different starting points, and you can end up with these wonderful textures to work with. And I think you can get them all the way out to 2048 by 2048, maybe 1024. I don't remember off the top of my head, and gives you a wonderful place to start with, and you can get a whole bunch of different designs, tiles, different wood types, and then completely customize it. Great program. If not, then you're going to want to go look at, say, CG Textures, try to find something and either create your own tile level texture. For the brick textures, while I'm here, for the walls, this is where I got those from. It's from TextureMate, and you can go ahead, and I'll try to put all these links in the PDF when we're done here. So back in here, let's take a look, and I do believe that this image layer, I think the easiest way to do this is to hit the scale button over here. We're going to take this thing, and yes, this is a 1024 by 1024. But what I found is that 1024, if we just put this in 4 times, which is what that would happen, we just drop that into the corner here. And GIMP doesn't seem to grab the corners, but what you can do that helps is just drag down the guides and drop them right on there. And I have the guides off at the moment, so let's go ahead and show our guides. Oh, maybe I didn't. Maybe it didn't grab it. But the other thing you can do is under Image and Guides and put in New Guide, and it will tell you you can put it right where you want it. So there's a vertical guide at the 2048 right there, and we'll go ahead and do this a few times. You can also do them by percentage, which actually will work quite well. We'll need one at 50 and at 0. And I created a hotkey for that so that I can put these in, and we're going to put them in. We'll try 4 times, repeating the texture 4 times. Because what I found when I did this test before is that the texture just looked too large when I got done with it. Whoops, I forgot to put in our horizontal texture, so we'll go ahead and throw that in. Might as well get that one in right away. And we'll need one at 0 and 25. And now this is all going to be determined on whether or not depends on what texture you use and how big you bring it in, and you're going to have to just kind of test it and make sure that it works once you get it onto the model. I tried this at the 4, and the floorboards just look too big inside the model, inside the game. So what we're going to do is take this layer and go ahead over here to our scale button. You can see that that's Shift T. But the other in GIMP, you'll probably see this, but real quick, if you go down to the keyboard shortcuts, you can type in any of the things that you see buttons and enable your own keyboard shortcut, and it will save them on the exit, as you can see here. And that makes you be able to get really quick doing with the things that you work with all the time. So again, we're going to click on it for the scale, and since we know exactly what this would be, which is 512 by 512, go ahead and do that and scale and let it figure out its scale. Then we're going to go over here and duplicate the layer. And whoops, still had it on scale. We want to move over to the move tool, which is M. And I don't think I changed that. I think that is the actual one. And we're going to move it, and it should snap to the guides. But something I want to do here is I'm going to go ahead and turn off the guides, which they're still there for snapping. So that works pretty cool. And go down, and if you hold the space bar down, you can move it. And it does look like this one at 100% came in. I found that a lot of times if you're doing stuff when you if you don't have the guide set up, or sometimes depending on the image, even if you do have the guide set up, you will get this tiny little space like that between yours. So you want to make sure that it's nice tucked right up inside there. And then once we have that done, what we're going to do is just use the merge down. And I'm doing this by right-clicking on the layer and merge down, and it will merge that and the one right below it down, and that will allow us to now duplicate this whole section. And it will move that over, and again it should snap right in place. And again, it looks pretty good, so we're going to go ahead and merge that down, and we'll duplicate that one. And this works really good when you have these, since this texture was 1024, and therefore you could get it already tiled into power of 2, so down to 512, 256, any of those, that's working quite well, because then we have the percentages that was easy to set up. If you're working with a different size file, which I think we will be with the walls, we will take a look at some other ways of doing that. And again, we're going to merge that down and duplicate the layer, and I'm going to grab my floor UVs and stick them up on top, and that should allow them to stay. And we'll go ahead and move that one, and that did not snap, and there it goes. Now here's what I'm talking about. If you look, when we snap this in, you have this little tiny line. So let's go make sure. Nope, you can see the line up there too. So we'll go ahead and Control Z and bump back all the way till we had these two separate ones, and grab the lower layer, this one, and hit move and click on the layer, and just use the arrow keys. We'll bump it up just that little bit, 1 pixel at a time, and go ahead and merge down and duplicate and get back out where we can see. And what I'm doing down at the bottom is all of the built-in from 12.5% to 800%, and I'm just moving back and forth. You can also use the Z key, which will do the zoom, and normally that will zoom in, so if you just click on it, it zooms up, and if you hit Control while that's activated, it will zoom down. And go back to the move key, and we have the layer that we want, and we will drop that in just like that. And again, you see we have that little line, so we're going to select that and use our arrow keys to get up there where you can't see the line anymore. And then again, I'm going to merge this down, and since we've moved it, what I want to make sure is that this is actually going to get to the whole thing. So I've gone and selected scale and clicked on it, and if you see here, our height is not 20 by 48. It had lost a couple of pixels where we'd moved that up. So we're going to make sure that that whole thing is done and ready to go. And let it do its scaling thing. And then I'm going to go ahead and save this file. And the way it seems to have been working for me lately, actually for quite a while now, is when I'm working with the I will build all the textures that we need, which is a diffuse map or the color map, a spec map, and then a height map to create our normal maps from. And you need those for almost every texture unless you don't want specularity or normals in your object for some reason. For instance, maybe if you were making a picture frame and you'd want the frame to have some bump to it, but the picture itself, you don't want anything to make that look other than flat, so you wouldn't want that. However, depending on what kind of a picture, you'd probably want a specular, especially if you're trying to make it look like a painting. Then the brush strokes have different specular, and we'll go over that a little bit real soon. But this is our floor, so we're just going to call it floor. Whoops, get up to the right spot here. So we're going to click in here, and we're going to call it floor. And then what I've been using, I got the gap blocks on wrong. What I've been using is comp, meaning composition or complete, or the whole entire file that we're working with, not an individual file. And we don't want this to be a JPEG either. The XCF is GIMP's excuse me, internal file code. And we'll go ahead and save that out. Alright. And again, get these back up on top, so they should be showing through. I'm not sure why they're not. They're there. But that is our UVs, and that would be much more important. Oh yes, you can see them. It would be much more important in certain ones other than this, where we're just using a square. But now, this is all fine and good, but it is fairly easy to see that this is a repeating pattern. And you could put this into the game and see how much that makes a difference, because it would make a difference depending on the angle, where it is, how often you're looking at it. So maybe if it was a ceiling, it'd be no big deal because people won't be staring at the ceiling. They'll glance and look, but not very much. If it's a far off object, you probably wouldn't know. This is a floor, and it may or may not make a difference to you as how you're doing it, but I'm going to do add a little bit more variance to it. And what we're going to do is just create a new layer to go over the whole thing. And it's a white layer. And make sure that our colors over here are set to our default black and white. And then go up to filters, render, clouds, and plasma. And do whatever you want to make this look. I would say you'd want a lot of variation in it, something like this, as opposed to, let's see if I could get one, something like that, or which is being caused by the turbulence. But also, if you look at the seeds, some of them have great big areas, and some of them have much smaller areas. And don't worry about the color so much, although dark and lightness will make a difference. See if we can get a little bit less black in there. And pick one that seems to be alright, and get the turbulence. You want a lot of changes in there, not all looking the same. So we're going to slap that in just by clicking OK and allowing it to do its job. Okay, now this isn't going to do us much good. So what we're going to do here, though, is go over to colors and desaturate right off the bat. And again, I want lots of contrast like that. Okay, and then what we're going to do here is take this layer and change it right away to multiply. And if you grab in the opacity, we can get, and let it go through its versions here, we can start to get kind of a grunge effect where at this point, if you look, although if you look closely, you can see that the tiling and repeating is still there. This effect of the mask is just darkening and lightening some areas, almost getting rid of it. It's almost impossible to see. At least to me, maybe that's just my screen, but it's very hard to see that. And so now just with this, we should be okay to put this in and not completely have it so obvious that it's a tileable texture and just repeating all the time. So again, we'll go ahead and save this. And now, the way Unity works is that the specular map, the thing that determines how shiny an object is and where it's shiny, which is a specular map, is actually put into the alpha channel of your diffuse map or color map. So the first thing we need to do, and what I'm going to do here, is I'm going to create a new layer group. I'm going to label that diffuse and original. And what that, I guess it didn't do it. Diffuse original. And then we'll take these layers and put them back in there exactly the way they came out, just like that, and shrink that up. And I'm going to duplicate that entire layer group. And I'm going to name this one diffuse, if it will name. It can get a little picky, and if you can't get it to work, just right click on it and click the layer attributes and fill it in its own box. And then we're going to go ahead and merge this down. Now this only has 2 layers, but you could go ahead and merge as many as you want by merge visible by turning off the original. And so now we have exactly what we should have, which is the floor diffuse by itself on one layer, not the combination of the others. And we're going to go ahead and duplicate that layer and pull it out of the layer group. Close this down and turn it off, because this is where we want to create our spec map. So the first thing we're going to do is spec maps and height maps are basically black and white images. So we're going to go ahead and take that down. Need to find a note here and see which one we want. And what I did was go ahead in Unity and download some free content from the Unity Marketplace and study them. And I would encourage you to do that if you can get into the Unity, download them, take a look at their maps, how they're put together, how dense the meshes are, and how well they work. And there's some free stuff on there that you can find right on the Unity Marketplace. But what I found is that the way they do their height maps and spec maps, the algorithm that they use, the spec map is mostly black, where the white is the actual highlights. In some programs, the spec map would be mostly a straight gray, which would mean no specularity, or a medium amount of specularity, and then black would be even less and white would be even higher. It seems that they don't go down, at least in any of the ones that I've found. So what we want is a mostly black map with just white specks on it to show the specularity. So I'm going to go with that. And then we're going to pull out our levels. And this is probably, I know this can end up being kind of complicated. Trying to grasp all of this in one time, but again, feel free to ask questions. I'll try to explain or maybe be able to give you hints. So what we're doing here is playing with the levels. And what the levels do, let's go ahead and set this back to its original. The middle slider, um, I don't know how to explain the middle slider, but if you take the black slider and move it over, you're going to get closer and closer to black. It is basically getting rid of the white. And the white slider adds in more white. And the middle slider then gives you a contrast between the two. So just play around with it to get a mostly black with some white highlights where you want them. Now the other option would be to go in and actually paint in where you want the specularity map, and while on a floor that may or may not be all that important, some things might, where you want the specularity to be in a specific spot. That's probably the best route to go with. So I'm going to get this set, and that should be alright about there. Now, as I said before, the specularity map sits inside the alpha channel. So in GIMP, this is how you do this. Had to go searching for this one. You right click on it, and we're going to add a layer mask. And what we want is the grayscale copy of the layer. And that's going to look a little funky for a minute there. And then we're going to go ahead and select the mask. This is the actual diffuse here. We want the actual mask. And we're going to Control C and copy that mask. And then go down to the diffuse channel. And again, add a layer mask. Oh, I have to get actually on the layer, not the group. Add a layer mask. And this one we want totally white. Add it in there. And again, select the layer mask and paste in our specular map. And it will come up with this floating section. All you do is hit this little anchor button and it will drop down in there. And now if you look at this, this is going to look almost like there's nothing there because we have mostly black, and black basically says that the image isn't showing through in the layer mask. But what's important is if we go over here, we have this alpha channel that has that mask in it, and that's where that's stored. So this is going to look quite funky, but it is correct. And if we go ahead and just to prove that it's not there, if we go down and disable the layer mask and turn that on, we can see that it's right there. And then we can go ahead and enable the layer mask, and it all seems to go away because it's the way the layer mask works. But what's important here is the alpha channel. So again, we're going to go ahead and just save that. So this has all of our information on it. And this one I'm going to go ahead and name the spec channel. Okay, and then under File, Export to, and what we want to do is export these files directly to where you have your Unity set up, which is mine under Tutorial Series. It's my Unity and the game and the assets, and this is Riggs General Store. And we have materials, but we need a new folder here for our textures. And we're going to call this Floor Diffuse. And PNG will work great because that will hold the alpha channel that we need, and go ahead and export that. And this is where I notice it working a little slower than some of the other programs, and I'm not really sure. But it's worth it for free as opposed to the $900 that Photoshop is. And we're getting this done so that you can play and learn for virtually for free. So now we have that one, and the last thing we need to do is create a height map so that we can create a bump map. And the bump map is what actually gives our the feeling that there's some depth and texture to our materials and our floors. So here I'm going to go ahead and disable the layer mask, and I'm going to duplicate this layer and drag it up on top of here, and go ahead and call this our height map. And the difference is the height map is the black and white version, and a normal map is actually done in variations of blues, and we'll get to that in just a second. So let's go ahead and turn this on, and we can actually delete the layer mask from this one. We don't need it. And again, we're going to desaturate it, and in this case the spec maps, the height maps are mostly white. Usually a gray would be your mid-ground, black goes down, and white goes up, but it seems that the people, as they're building them, are using a much whiter gray to determine their baseline, and they look almost white if you go look at them, the free ones, and download and take a look at the textures that they're building inside, which you can do all inside of Unity. So alright, so we've desaturated this, and we want to do the same thing, which we're going to go to our levels. Actually, let's just go ahead first, and we're just going to invert and get this looking. Well, maybe we don't want to, because we want to make sure that the grooves, I believe, are still black. So we want to go into our levels, and we could probably invert that, but we want to get it up to, it seems, somewhere in this range, that they're using a very a white gray instead of a gray. And we still have the black there. And what we'll probably do is go ahead and leave that the way it is, and grab our brightness and contrast and pull up some contrast, and even the brightness. That's a little too much. We're losing our grain, and we want the grain in there. And some of it you'll notice is being lost about where our map is on there, which is actually pretty good. So it's like there's grime or something built up. So we'll go ahead with, and we'll try this out as a height map. So what we're going to use to create our bump map, and what we need to do here first is go ahead and save this and export this one as a height map. Now, we probably won't be using the height map inside of Unity, but I still think we'll just save them all in the same spot, and you can always delete them when you're completely satisfied that it's done. So we'll export that height map. We're running kind of long today, so we'll probably stop right after we get our bump maps created here. Alright, and then we're going to go into Crazy Bump, which you can download for the Mac for free. If you have a PC, there is a paid version. There is at least you could start by taking a look at, I believe there is a demo version, and there are different methods of whoops, show you what I'm doing here. So once you have this up, we want to open a file from a height map, and we got to go back and find my files, desktop, under Unity, and textures. Nope, that's where I've got under the game, tutorials, assets, general store, textures, height map. And it'll take a minute for it to figure out what it's doing. As it says, testers may pretend to see a progress bar here. And it is progressing. And what Crazy Bump does is take this black and white image and give us an image that will give us depth that your game engine can use. So this is your normal map, and here, as soon as it gets going, I think we'll go over to the box, and it's probably going slow because of the recording. But if you zoom in here, you can see it look, and I like to turn off this parallax displacement. And you can see how it looks like there's bumps in there. And thus the bump map or normal map, because this is a normal map setting. You can change the intensity and play around with these dials about as much as you want. I think my testing said this should probably be about 40, just a little bit less. And it will give you a pretty decent representation of what it looks like. And we want to go ahead and save this out as a normal. And so we're going to replace our height file with the normals. And now we're ready to bring these into Unity and or go work on the map for the walls. And we will do one of those two things in the next video. So I hope you're enjoying the series. Please go ahead and sign up for the Monster Club if you want to get all of the advantages of the files. And we will see you soon. Enjoy. Bye-bye.